Okay, folks, we are live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's Committee of Adjustments for October the 11th, 2022. It is being live streamed on YouTube, as well as, if you wish to follow the agenda, it is on greaternapanee.com. With that, I will call the meeting to order. I'll look, please, for the adoption of the agenda as presented, please. Councillor McCormack, Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Comments or questions? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? I wish to point out that 6.2, I had registered a conflict of interest because the land involves a family member, but we are not making a decision on it tonight. It is simply being deferred for more information. So I'm not going to withdraw my conflict, but I am going to make public that it is a conflict for me, and if there is discussion, I will have to leave the room. Okay? Any other conflict of interest? No. Adoption of the minutes, please, as prepared for the Committee of Adjustment, September the 13th, 2022. Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Pennell. All in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Land Sembrance application, PLCOR 2022-043. J. Dachvina? Dacheva, okay, thank you. 4946 County Road 9, legal description, part lot 11, concession 4, North Fredericksburg. Michael, do you wish to speak to this, please?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. This application was deferred from a previous meeting of the committee. The lot that's being created or is requested to be created fronts onto Abrams Road, so the lot has frontage on both County Road 9 and Abrams Road. It's a substantially sized parcel, and upon review by the CRCA, they noted significant woodlands and some wetlands on the property, so they requested deferral of a decision until an EIS was prepared to their satisfaction. That has been completed and reviewed by the CRCA. They have no concerns with the results of the EIS. However, they have requested that a development agreement be entered into with the municipality to identify items B, I through II in the proposed conditions. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, but it appears to be lands that would be developable, supportable by policy, and with the EIS and CRCA's sign-off, staff are comfortable recommending approval to the committee.
Thank you. Before I go to council for questions, I will ask, is there anyone here speaking for? Anyone here speaking against? Let the record show that there is no one speaking for or against. Council, questions of Michael on this application? Seeing none, you have a recommendation before you. Moved by Deputy Mayor Kaiser, seconded by Councillor Johnson. No further comments or questions? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. 5.2. Land Severance Application, PLCON 2022-061. G. Therasingham, not bad. 78 Mel Street West, legal description, part lot 23, plan 82, Napanee. Before I go any further, is there anyone here speaking for? Thank you. Is there anyone here speaking against? Okay, so I will ask you to identify the person, the gentleman speaking for. Would you just identify yourself for the clerk for records, please?
Sean Legere, Senior Planner at the RFA Planning Consultant. I'm the agent for the application. We have reviewed the staff report and concur with the recommendations. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, would you like to identify yourself with your name and address, please?
My name is Graham, 81 Robinson Street. I'm a landlord. I own several properties in that neighborhood, and I have concerns over the existing waterways there and also traffic being on the smaller street. I just have some ideas of rather changing the plans around, not just totally rejecting them.
Okay, thank you, sir. We'll give you a chance to speak to it further. Right now, I just want to get names and addresses if I could, please. Go ahead, ma'am, please.
Deborah Wonk at 73 Water Street, directly adjacent to them. I'm not disputing the build itself, it's just, I had sent photos where their tree is going directly under our fence, and replacing that fence as well. That was
Okay.
the only part of this, so I don't even know if this is the right venue, I apologize.
Probably another matter, but we still will put in your comments. Okay. Any questions then for council directed to Michael, please? After hearing from... Nothing? Okay, I thought I'm sorry, I thought we had. I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead then, please.
So, thank you, Your Worship. So the application before the committee here is to subdivide 78 Mill Street West. It's currently a through lot, meaning it has frontage on both Water and Mill Street. It's currently developed with a single detached residence, and I believe there's a garage at the rear, along with a fence. So the proposal is to essentially divide that lot in half. The resultant lot sizes would be very consistent with the lot sizes in the area, although slightly deficient for today's standards for the establishment of a semi-detached residence, and there would need to be relief around front yard setback for the proposed single detached residence fronting onto Water Street on the south side. Staff have heard the concerns from Mr. Graham regarding the drainage on the property, and have recommended a condition be imposed, condition number 6, whereby a grading plan be prepared by a licensed professional engineer to the town's satisfaction that really takes into consideration any offsite drainage that might be entering onto these lands and need to be conveyed properly. There is a substantial culvert underneath Water Street on the south side. So we do want to make sure that that water is not impeded by any future development. So this grading plan completed prior to the creation of the lot would really lock in that development and any grading that would take place on the property. And through the implementation of a development agreement registered on title, any future landowners could be bound by the requirements of that grading plan. So certainly understanding of the concerns. From a traffic perspective, we've reviewed it. The proposal is to add essentially one more unit on Mill Street than what currently exists on the property. We don't believe there's going to be a conceivable impact that would really degrade the operations of the road there. We don't have that big of a concern from a traffic perspective. We do believe that that the development can proceed accordingly on that basis. However, if there are any questions further of the committee, I'd certainly be happy to answer those, or possibly Mr. Leger as well.
Council, questions to Michael concerning this? You will get a chance. Did I see your hand up? Yeah, both you and Mr. Graham will get a chance to speak. Go ahead, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick comment. My only concern was how this build would reflect on the other housing already in the neighborhood. Michael has thoughtfully already answered that, and for that I thank you.
Okay, the three people that we have, unless, Michael, you wanted to speak back to that. Anything else from council? Seeing none, I will I'll go with you first, Mr. Graham, if you have some comments that you wanted to make on this. Yeah, I'll have to have you come and sit in front of the mic, Mr. Graham, because if you don't, then the people at home can't hear you.
Okay. The problem is not necessarily with the drainage. The town has already pointed out that there's going to be an engineering drawing on that. I have the concerns in the traffic. They say that there's not going to be any problem with more traffic on Mill Street, and yet Water Street is a few feet wider, and at this point in time there's 12 dwellings facing onto Mill Street between Robinson and West, and there's only 9 dwellings on Water Street. All right. So the 2 dwellings on Water Street, that makes good sense, because there's there's more room, there's more traffic, there's more off-street parking there, right? I'm seeing that the one building that's already there could remain. You've already got brand new, it was 2 or 3 years ago that that section of it was already dug up for brand new plumbing, sewage, everything, water. Why not take advantage of that with your units, your double units being on facing Water Street? That's the only questions that I have.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam, did you wish to speak to it? I don't think the tree is going to be part of that. That's going to be a property, but, okay, certainly, come head up and we'll listen to your comments on it, please.
Just a general question about the plan. Is this a total tear down the semi? That is going to be at the front on Mill Street? Total tear down and, okay. And then...
Just for those that can't see at home, and I'm not sure whether it's being picked up by the camera, there's not a mic to be shared at this point. I know Michael's trying to keep his distance. Mr. Nobes has indicated that yes, it is a complete tear down.
And then on Water Street, the plan, is this a 2-story, a 3-story? Because it's only going to be like 4 feet from our fence. I'm just wondering about the plan.
Yeah, come ahead up if you want. Thank you. Thank you, go ahead.
Through
please.
you, Your Worship. It is actually on the consent sketch. The plan is to have a 2-story single detached dwelling fronting onto Water Street.
Okay, that answer the question then? Yes. Okay, thank you. Anything further from council? You do have a recommendation before you. Council's wishes, or Michael, did you want to add something? Certainly, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a comment where Mr. Graham indicated potentially putting the semi-detached facing onto Water Street. The issue there is that drainage corridor. Maintaining an appropriate width for that for future maintenance. It would be very challenging to fit a semi-detached facing onto that, facing onto Water Street rather than onto Mill Street. I believe that was the rationale from Mr. Leger's proposal.
Okay, thank you. Council's wishes. Councilor McCormick, staff recommendation?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Mayor.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Pennell is seconding the motion for staff recommendation, which is that we receive the technical report and further that the application to sever 407 meter squared lot be granted subject to the conditions as contained in your agenda. If there are no further questions, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. .3 land severance application PLCOR 2022-069 E. Ruth, Bass Cove Road, immediately north of 226 Bass Cove. Legal description: Part Blocks A and B, Plan 546, Part 7 on Reference Plan R16, Adolphustown. Is there anyone here speaking for? Is there anyone here speaking against? Let the record show that there is no one here speaking for or against. Michael.
Thank you, Worship. This application in the form of the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment was discussed at the previous meeting of council at that public meeting. At that meeting, I discussed the rationale for why we currently don't encourage new lot creation on private roads. I believe I was able to quell any concerns that council might have had. This is the lot creation portion of this proposal. So the application is to create a 0.18 hectare lot, used to exist and unfortunately merged on title a number of years ago. So the CRCA has been circulated as they always are for planning applications within their watershed. One item that they have requested is the completion of an EIS as a condition of consent. So typically they request that a decision be deferred until an EIS to their satisfaction is completed. In this case, they're pretty confident that the woodlands and ecological features won't be negatively impacted as a result of the creation of this small lot. They're still requesting that this be completed. And I would like to point out that we've recommended that a hydrogeological review be undertaken. Since this is a fairly small lot, there are a number of existing lots within proximity, and it does trigger under our current I guess, criteria around when we request this hydrogeological review. It certainly meets that criteria. So those are two conditions that I just wanted to point out for the committee if there was any further discussion that we wanted to have regarding that.
Anyone wishing, go ahead, Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I know the property very well, and the property immediately to the west of it is a lot that has been fully serviced with a well and septic, and it was originally owned by the same applicant here. I don't see the need for hydrological process in this case because it's right next door. I mean, within 5 feet, you're in the same location as the property before. There's tons of water in the well that was done there within the last 4 years. And I'm just speaking up as I believe we need to process things a little bit more simpler when we can to be able to come up with affordable lots for affordable housing in general, and this would certainly meet that requirement. So I don't know, Michael, if there's if we're limited to this. I know that Mr. Ruth is more than prepared to put a well in, and I don't see any concerns with that with regards to the other wells that have been put in within the last several years or 10 years. So just that's my question, if there's any way to get around that. It's a simple proposal, and I thought when I read the conditions from the Conservation Authority, I thought they might be a little bit more than what we need to have.
Go ahead, Michael.
In response to the hydrogeological concerns raised, the committee can make any decision that you like. This is just what staff is recommending based on criteria and policies and past practice. So certainly if you'd like to deviate from that, staff don't have a concern if it's well known that there is good water supply in the area, good quality and quantity of water. Perhaps what we could do to, I guess, keep the spirit of the proposed condition is perhaps have the well installer, when they're performing their 2-hour mandatory pump test, measure drawdown in adjacent wells to this proposed new well at regular intervals to make sure there's no, I guess, negative interference per se. It wouldn't be a full hydrogeological review, but it would still ensure that there is no well interference happening, if that is something that the committee may be open to doing.
Any further? Go ahead,
So
Councillor.
thank you, Worship. Just to add to that, I mean, I see the provincial regulations are changing, and we're trying to be a little bit more, and we are the Committee of Adjustment, so we, after 4 years, have some kind of insight as to what we need to look for. And I'm just speaking for myself here. I would like to suggest that we proceed with this with a requirement for a well, and that the well testing has to be done before any development is done. But I'm convinced that this would be an appropriate approach for this particular case. Thank you.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, or maybe John knows better, how common is it for the properties on that point to have shore adjacent wells? In which case the drawdown would be drawing the lake down effectively.
Yeah, I'll let Councillor McCormack answer that.
Just, thank you. One more thing that I remember is that the lot next door, I think it was 235, might be the address, there was no concern from the Conservation Authority at the time when the application was made, they said, and it was Mr. Schmidt who was in charge of the file at the time, and Andrew said, even though it's shoreline residential, it's not on the water. It's on the point within the north and south side of the point, so we have no concerns. It's not part of the floodplain or anything. So I was just a bit surprised that within 3 years or 4 years later, now they're recommending this additional work to be done. I just find it might be a little bit much for this particular case. And I'm not sure, Deputy Mayor, if I've answered the question, or?
If I could just jump in here, I think there might be a little bit of confusion. I think you might be referring to the EIS, where the Conservation Authority, so the environmental review, meaning the woodlands that were identified on the property. So there's 2 points here. There's one that staff are recommending the hydrogeological review, and 2, the CRCA is recommending the EIS. So I'm not sure if there's concern with both of those, or just one. I just would like some clarification.
If I may continue?
Certainly.
Both. So the woodland, this was the end of the farm. It hasn't been farmed in 70 or 100 years. It's inaccessible for farm equipment. So whatever growth is there is just over the last number of years after the farm was abandoned because of the development on Perch Cove Road and Bass Cove Road. So it's not a 200-year-old timber property. It's just growth because it was unattended and couldn't be handled. And the property next door, 235, was a similar lot. So I just don't understand why, if 235, we were able to see that go through without any additional requirements, why this one couldn't go as well. Again, because provincially, there's new mandates coming, and we're trying to simplify things, and this is an example, I think, on a private road, where that's my recommendation anyways. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Worship, through you. Michael, this, do we know when 235 was severed off by any chance, off the top of your head?
Through your worship, I believe it was a number of years ago when the overall plan for the area, I think when it was created in the 60s. Okay. Give or take.
So since then, we've started to add in this I can't say the word, but the study, right? And I think that it's all, respectfully speaking of this, I think it's okay to say now that we don't need to add this funds onto it for trying to keep the cost down. But if there is a problem, we're going to really hear about it. If they put a well on there and other neighboring wells start to drain off on this, I think I'd rather have that piece of paper in the file on this, and only being fair to everybody else that we've already asked them to do this. And I just think that we're going to be setting a precedence if we do for someone, we don't for the other, and we only have theory of saying, well, because the one beside it was okay. But with that being said, I do also like the idea of having the neighboring wells being studied, but wouldn't that be part of that hydrology study anyway?
Yeah, correct, through your worship. If the concern is around overall cost to the applicant, a reduced cost would be, the well drillers on site, they're performing their pump tests that they have to do anyway. Typically, they do that test, and then the hydrogeologist follows in tow and does their different testing. In this case, what the committee could consider imposing, rather than the hydrogeologist getting involved, was have the well driller, when they're pumping this new well, monitor, essentially drop a tape measure down in adjacent wells to see what the static level is pre-pumping and during pumping, and what the recovery is, to see if there is any impact, or if there's a major impact, then potentially we could get the hydrogeologist involved. So we could blend it. If there's a negligible impact to neighboring wells as a result of the well drillers pump testing and they could furnish a report to us to show us what the impact is, if any. And if there is a substantial impact, then we could write the condition in such that if there is an appreciable impact to neighboring properties, that a hydrogeologist review the results and provide an opinion, something to that effect. It would still meet the spirit, but it wouldn't be a full-blown hydrogeological review like we've been imposing previously. So just something further to consider.
And just to follow up on that.
Certainly.
And would that be something that you'd be comfortable with doing with going forward on other properties?
I would be comfortable with it. In areas that are well known for good supplies of water, I certainly wouldn't have an issue with it. I know City of Kingston City of Kingston has been revising their hydrogeological conditions per se for examples like this. And I believe the Frontenacs or South and Central Frontenac are kind of following suit in that they're not requiring hydrogeological reviews all the time, but they do want to make sure that there's not impact to neighboring wells that will be negative ultimately. So I certainly wouldn't be opposed to going in this direction in the future, so long as we still have the ability to essentially flip that well driller measurement per se into getting a hydrogeologist involved, right? So it could be a if this then that type of condition, that if there's really a lot of water and there's no impact to neighboring properties, the well driller report will suffice. Otherwise, get a hydrogeologist involved to provide an opinion on the matter.
Okay, I like that. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Michael, for the background. I think from a Conservation Authority perspective, a lot of people have been concerned over the past 4 or 5 years about the number of small parcels of property that are being sold on rural or agricultural or previously undeveloped land, and their neighbors all rely on wells. We have had instances here where people have been very vocally concerned about another 1 or 2 properties on the road will draw from their own wells. I think we have made tremendous progress in protecting the existing residents, as well as allowing new residents to build properties or to develop properties and subdivide land. We need to find, I agree, we need to find a balance between always asking for the hydrological survey. We have areas that are well known for being more susceptible to poor water flows. And the challenge is not just in the year that you divide the land and build a property, or divide the land and build a house, that there's going to be a water challenge. What happens 10 years from now? And what happens 10 years from now if the neighbors come back to us and say, look, you let 4 more people build houses on this road and now none of us have enough water. So as a community, we also need to defend our existing residents. I think the proposal that Michael has suggested is a good balance between existing residences, the Conservation Authority's mandate, and the ability for affordable housing. So I would support that as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I think we're on the right track here. So if we could satisfy by having a well test done at the same time, that's would report back with the right conditions. That'd be number one. And the other one is EIS. I still don't understand why we would have to do that when it's just growth that happened for a parcel of land that was at the end of a farm that has been just left to its own for a number of years. It can't get farmed now because with the cottages over the last 60, 70 years, and the roads on either side, the equipment just can't get down there. And as many know, the equipment's getting bigger and bigger. So this is just an opportunity for someone to sever a piece of property and turn it into a building lot that's going to be affordable because it's in a rural part. It's not on the water and it's on a private road. So thank you.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
A question and a comment. you said that this was inadvertently merged with the adjacent parcel. The original survey was 1968, so this lot has had a PIN number since 1968, but it was inadvertently merged, so we just have to recreate the severance, correct?
Effectively. So this was created prior to subdivision control, so there was no consent approval at that time. It was just a registration of lots. So this would be the first consent approval that this would effectively create. So once this is created, it wouldn't merge thereafter, because once a consent, it's always consent. So
Okay, so given that, I'm inclined to agree with Councillor McCormick on the EIS. When I read through the CRCA's letter, they're not concerned, but it sounds like they just want it as a piece of paper in the file. And given the lot fabric and the fact that the adjacent property on the opposite side is a much larger property and would have more impact if they ever sought to subdivide that or anything further, I don't think it's necessary. And if it's only a suggestion, not a requirement, then I would suggest we drop that one and I'd stick with the well drawdown test as suggested. I'd make a motion on that.
Yeah, I just want to ask a few questions, if I might, please, Deputy Mayor.
You go right ahead.
Thank you. When we started these hydrogeological studies, I know I'm the same way, it's a tough word. Who put that rule in our book of rules?
we didn't put it in the book of rules, but it was recommended as a result of conservation authority review, and they provided a general criteria for when it would be advisable to recommend those conditions to the committee. So that there are policies in our official plan that state, where there are known areas of potential groundwater impact, then further study can be requested. So it's in our policies. It just hasn't really been activated per se over the last number of years until somewhat recently.
And when did we institute it? 3, 4 years ago?
2.
2 maybe?
Approximately 2.
And have we ever waived or adjusted it before in this term of council?
Not to my knowledge. Not when criteria were met to recommend that type of review.
And do we have, I hear everyone speak of pockets that we know that the water's good, that we know that there's a supply, that it's ample and it's pure and it's not sulfur or E. coli or whatever might be in there. Do we have data to back up the areas within our municipality that would show us where we would be confident to make these kind of decisions to deviate from what we've been doing for a couple of years?
I would say the best resource would be either past studies in the area or MOE well records would be the next best piece of information.
Okay. I mean, that being said, I'm certainly for any kind of progress that we can make, and not just in affordable housing, but in housing in general and bringing residents to the area. But I do have concerns that if there is impact on people, one side or the other, or we get snowballing it and it just goes on and on, that we may cause a problem. And I think it's something that this council and the next council should be looking at. But we also need to make sure that we're allowing people to do things at a much more advantageous and more reasonable cost, because I think as soon as we put some of these studies up, the dollar signs appear in people's eyes, and maybe the people that are performing, and I say that with all due respect, but it's something that's impactful to somebody that's doing it. But I'm not comfortable with deviating if we haven't done it before without the data before us to say that this is an area that wouldn't be impacted. But with that and those things being said, go ahead, Councillor Richardson.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. And I have to agree with you. I know. I hope you're sitting down. But I have to agree with you. I mean, it only takes a trip down to our water plant to see how many cubicles are going down there on a daily basis. Very rarely do you ever pull into that parking lot and there isn't somebody down at the bottom end filling up water. And these are existing homes, not alone homes that are going to be built. So I think we got, I mean, we have a process that's available here, so why not take advantage of the process? And I have to apologize to the residents, I have to spend a little bit more money, but it's just a process that is in place that will afford us an opportunity in the future to cover our butts on it. And I'm the same as you, very reluctant to try and, for a better lack of word, Band-Aid the situation by saying, well, we can do the drawdowns on the wells, but if it doesn't go very well, then we're gonna have to have it done anyway. So, you know, depending on when the drawdowns of the wells are, whether it's in April or in October, you may get different results as well. So I'm following your lead on this, Your Worship, and I have some very strong concerns with respect to not doing the hydrological reports with direct recommendations from the CRCA.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor McCormack.
One more follow-up, Your Worship. Another example, there was a gentleman who had an application to extend his deck on his home off of Highway 33. And the two requirements that he received, one was that he had to have permission from the MTO, and the other one was Conservation Authority. His home sits from Highway 33 about 5 football fields in length from Highway 33. And there would be, I couldn't understand why he would have to get permission from the MTO, which unfortunately could take 3, 4, 5 months. And the other one was Conservation Authority. I told the gentleman this is just standard because his residence from the water was again maybe 3 football fields. So I mean, it's a huge property. And anyway, so the Conservation Authority quickly waived their interest in the property. And there was a discussion with our staff, and we were able to bypass the MTO requirement because in this particular case, it really made no sense. It was kind of like a general rule. So I'm just mentioning this evening because to me, knowing the properties in question very well, that's why I'm speaking on it. The EIS to me, as Deputy Mayor made in his motion, I don't think is necessary. And as far as the well, if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. And so we're going to get to a point where a small property like this, for whatever the value is and whatever it's going to go for, once you start adding all the fees, the initial application for the severance and the well test, it gets to a point where they're just going to say, you know what, I'm not going to offer up my property for sale. I'm not going to make an application to sever. And I think the municipality, we're going to lose out with the opportunity to offer up affordable property for affordable housing. So,
Okay, thank you. Points taken. Okay, Council, unless somebody else has something to say, or Michael, you have something to add? Council's wishes here. Let's see what's going to fly.
I propose to go ahead without the EIS.
So-
But with the, well, I had suggested with the drawdown study as Michael proposed as a shortcut to the Hydro G, but if the will is to stick with the full Hydro G, I'm fine with that. And Hydro G is a nice short form of that, by the way.
Thank you. So just for
Hydro G, no EIS.
Okay. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Richardson. Any further discussion on this one? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion. Motion is carried. Opposed? One opposed, please, Madam Clerk. Good discussion, though, looking into the future as to what changes are going to be made. 6.1 minor variance application, PLVAR 2022-074, J. Milliken, Switzerville Road between 3233 and 3281 Switzerville Road, legal description, part lot 20, concession 6, North Fredericksburg. Is there anyone here speaking for or against this? Seeing no one is in attendance to speak for or against, Michael, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This was a condition that was imposed on a previous consent approval a year to a year and a half ago, I believe it was. This was as a result of the merger of two lots that previously existed at the upon the death of one of the individuals on title. So unfortunately, it requires consent approval to recreate the lot. The resultant frontage, which really has no change in what is on the ground today per se, is really the need to meet today's criteria for frontage under the rural zone, where 50 meters is all that's existing. There are houses on either side, so in order to allow the land to continue to be used for farming purposes, which it is now under cultivation, I believe, and then for the establishment of a residence, this minor variance is required to implement that condition of previous consent approval.
Questions of Michael on the minor variance? Seeing none, you do have a recommendation before you. Deputy Mayor Kaiser is moving staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor Johnson. If there are no further comments or questions, all in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Second minor variance application, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, that this would involve, if you're going to have a discussion on it, involves a family member, but because it is just a motion to defer, if that's what council is going to wish, I am not going to leave the chair. Minor variance application PLBAR 2022-081 1652435 Ontario Inc., Dairy Avenue, legal description, part lot 22 and 23, concession 2, RP 29, R6826, part 1. You have a recommendation before you. Move staff recommendation with Councillor McCormack, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kaiser. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Motion for adjournment of the Committee of Adjustments. Deputy Mayor Kaiser, Councillor Johnson, all in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. We'll just take a 5-minute before we head into